Hello, fairy tale things. Austin here, and yes, I have rearranged the collection once more, so I think we'll be due for another room tour soon. But while rearranging, I took note of what I consider to be my favorite part of the Shrek collection, and that's the 6-inch action figures. So the first 3 Shrek movies had 3 different toy lines by completely different companies, but they're all compatible. They all scale together. So if you collected these 3 lines, you can truly build out the world of Far, Far Away. However, there is one really notable omission. Princess Fiona. Now, we did get 2 figures of Fiona, but they're both in her human form, and oddly enough, both in her green dress. Now, for the first Shrek movie, I understand this omission, because Fiona turning into an ogress is the big reveal in the final act. So any merchandise of this would have been a huge spoiler. For example, the McFarlane fashion doll, which I consider to be, without a doubt, the best Fiona piece of merchandise we got, that likeness is just amazing, is still in her human form. Any of the merchandise, any of the promotional material was her as a human. The only exception I could find was the Kubrick figure, which was Japan exclusive, and I think released actually after the movie, so maybe that might explain why that one's a spoiler. But when Shrek 2 came around, it was really odd to me that Hasbro chose to revisit Fiona as a human, and even to put her back in a green dress. Now, it is the Shrek 2 green dress, which is a little different, it's got the poofs, but the figures are just so similar looking that it's just so unfortunate. Our collections are doomed to not have an Ogre Fiona. Now, you would think by the 3rd movie, this drought of Ogress Fiona would have gotten better, but it really didn't. We did get a fashion doll of Fiona, and while this is nice, it is a transformation feature, so you can take off the ogre head here, and she has her human form underneath. It's a fun play feature, but seeing this big ogre head on her regular human body is just so odd, and still looks odd to me on the shelf to this day. Now, granted, I am missing her ogre hands. They are quite rare, so maybe when you put those hands on, the doll looks a little more convincing. Now, I do have a theory on why Ogress Fiona was omitted from so much merchandise, and maybe this is just a really cynical way of looking at things, but do you think it's possible that the companies of the 2000s avoided Ogress Fiona because she didn't fit the corporate definition of pretty? I mean, think about it. She was our first mainstream plus-sized princess character. To an extent, the real first, mainstream plus-sized action character aimed at kids. So many of the Disney princesses were just cut from the same cloth. I mean, look at the princess dolls. They all shared the same buck. And maybe it just could have been a cost-cutting measure, but the fact that these MGA Shrek dolls did use unique bodies makes me think otherwise. Maybe they thought that a plus-size character wouldn't sell to little girls because she didn't fit the definition of pretty, which is really unfortunate, and we have moved past that. I mean, if you go down the doll aisle now, you'll see so much more representation across all the different dolls. I know Monster High in particular has gotten very good about having plus-size characters in the line, so I do have a feeling that if Shrek were revisited by a toy company today, Fiona would get a proper plus-size buck, but I don't know, there's just something about seeing this ogre head on the human body that is just really off-putting. What's really unfortunate is there actually was a much more accurate Ogress Fiona doll with a correct body type, but this was a collector doll that wasn't specifically targeted at kids, and it was only sold at Blockbuster rental stores in really limited quantities. So, guess more of a collector's item than a toy, if you can find it, because that doll has become even tougher to get than this one right here. And maybe to give a little bit of credence into my theory, there was a Fiona sub-brand for Shrek the Third. So there were bedding, all sorts of strange stuff of just Fiona, and it strangely featured her in her human form. She was even drawn like a Disney princess. And check this out. This is the lamp for Shrek the Third, and What's odd is she's in her green dress, and she's a human, which she isn't even in Shrek the Third. Like, Shrek the Third is actually the only movie where she's an ogress the whole time. The other film, she's at least briefly a human. So what gives? What is the excuse for this? It's very odd. That's not to say the character was avoided entirely. She was featured prominently in the McDonald's toys, and this could have made a great substitute for a 6-inch Fiona. Unfortunately, all of the Fiona McDonald's figures are her, like, crouching, bending, or kicking. They're very dynamic action poses, and they always have her hunched over, which gives the impression that she is much shorter than the other characters. Just put her next to the McDonald's Shrek and see how wildly out of scale they looked, just because of this strange sculpting decision. Even most recently with the Shrek Funko Pops, we were given Fiona as a human again, which it just is so odd to me that even today we're still not seeing as many figures of this character as I would like. Now, I think this video will become outdated when Shrek 5 releases. I have my fingers crossed that we're going to get a proper Fiona action figure. But until then, what are our options? Well, we actually do have a couple. One solution you can use is the Shrek the Third lamp. Now this one is funny because I just showed that Fiona lamp aimed at the girls market, but this one was the non-Fiona branded lamp aimed at, I guess we would call the boys market. But what's funny is this is actually a better Fiona lamp than that one because the character is much more accurate. This is a gorgeous sculpt of Fiona in her Shrek the Third attire. The face, the dress, everything about it is perfect. And if this was just a hollow Fiona figure, it will be perfect, but as you can see, there are some drawbacks. So I mentioned this was a lamp, and yes, it was. See the hole in the bottom? No, it's not a bank. I know what you're thinking, but it's not a bank. This actually clicked onto the lamp, and I say lamp very liberally. It was a really small push light, and you would push this down, and it would theoretically light up the room, but I don't think the light worked that well. I'm a toy expert. I can see right through this. This lamp was just an excuse to sell a Shrek action figure for a company that didn't have the license to make Shrek action figures. But as it is, Fiona and Shrek are stuck together, which is pretty unfortunate because the Shrek attached to Fiona, he's not awful, but he's not great. The outfit just looks a little inaccurate. The tunic is way too green. We have no tartan print on the pants. And worst of all, they gave him those pink lips that just look so out of place. So unfortunately, this one does get knocked down a peg for being stuck to Shrek, and an unfortunate Shrek at that. Also, Fiona is in her Shrek the Third attire, and I don't know about you, but I don't want my only Fiona figure on my shelf to remind me of Shrek the Third. Thankfully, we have one other option, and that's the articulated 6-inch action figure of Fiona as an ogress. No, wait a second. I thought I said that didn't exist. Or does it? Everything I just said in this video is a complete lie if you lived in France. Because in France, you had access to a 6-inch articulated Fiona action figure. When I first saw this figure, I assumed it was a bootleg, and it took quite a bit of research figuring out exactly what it was. But here's what I could gather. A fast food restaurant called Quick ran a promotion for Shrek 2, and they offered 6-inch articulated Shrek action figures. I honestly don't know if these were included in the kids' meal, or if these were some sort of premium that you added on to your meal. I say that because these figures are really nice for kids' meal toys. They stand at about 6 to 7 inches, so they're much taller than the McDonald's Shrek figures. And yes, they're fully posable. We got Shrek, Donkey, Puss in Boots, and Fiona. And yes, the sculpts are just as cursed as you'd believe them to be. They're pretty rough, but I think they're charming. Okay, except for Puss in Boots. That is straight up nightmare fuel. Fiona fared the best out of all of them, which is great because it makes her a good stand-in for a 6-inch figure. She actually looks pretty good with the Hasbro Shrek figure, because the sculpting on that one is pretty eh. And truth be told, she looks the best with the bendy Shrek figure that came out last year. Maybe it's the brighter green they used for that one and the less detail, but they just look nice together. Again, the sculpt is not perfect, but I'm surprised by how accurate it is. The plastic is hefty, like there's no cheapness at all. Any doubts I had that this was a bootleg were washed away the moment I opened it up and looked at it, because this thing is sturdy. Articulation is also, it's not great, but it's actually better than the Hasbro Shrek figures. We have a pivot head, we have a pivot waist, the arms have multiple degrees of movement, even the hands have a turning joint. And then there's actually quite a lot of movement in the legs, but sadly it is pretty inhibited by the dress. But the way the dress was done in this kind of thick rubber actually complements her quite well. I think if they had gone with soft goods, it would have looked a little weird, because Fiona's dress in Shrek 2 is kind of like one piece. But yeah, even if you look at the back of the dress, it's even got the open back cut, and her back is even painted, which is so unusual. So many, like, mainstream toys still don't paint the backs of their figures, because, you know, you can't see them from the packaging. But this figure is seriously impressive. She does have peg holes on her feet, and I believe this figure did come with a base at some point, but I was not able to find a packaged example. Truth be told, finding this figure at all is gonna be tough. I've been searching for about a year for this figure, but I would say just watch eBay, wait for it to show up, and then be prepared to pay exorbitant shipping fees. The head sculpt is probably the weakest element. Those eyebrows are pretty cursed, and if you were a skilled painter, you could probably fix this figure yourself. Because the sculpt is so solid, there is great potential here for a pretty amazing Fiona figure. And I know I talked about how the companies in the USA seemed shy to make Fiona properly plus-sized, but this figure does not. It got her body and buck down perfectly. Even the legs you can't see under the dress. I mean, yep, that's Fiona. They didn't shy away from making this Ogress Fiona. So, this figure is pretty fantastic. I have zero issues at all. Yes, the sculpt is rough and she's not perfect, but for a very limited run fast food promotion, it's pretty damn good. And how crazy is it that this is our only way of putting an articulated Ogress Fiona in our figure collections? So, I salute you, France. Thank you for making every Shrek fan's dream come true. Hopefully by the time Shrek 5 comes out, this video is a different story, and we have a nicely articulated, definitive Fiona figure. But until then, I'll gladly be taking my quick Fiona limited figure from France and be adding her to the Shrek collection. And finally, building out and completing that 6-inch world of Far, Far Away. That's all for this episode. Thanks for watching, and live a happily ever after.